So I'm recording. When were you born and where?
I was born in August of 1959 in Pinehurst, North Carolina.
And does that mean you're a Leo?
I'm an early Virgo.
And I noticed that one of your books includes astrology and along with medical diagnosis. So how do you think of yourself in terms of being an early Virgo? You like to talk, you're sensitive, you care about people, what?
That's a good summary. That's a very good summary. But there's still a lot of Leo traits in there. I have a sort of a big need for fashion and appearance and stuff. So there's Leo left in there.
And what about your rising and moon signs?
My moon is actually in Leo, and my rising sign is Pisces.
So that probably contributed to your sensitivity.
That's right.
Your clairvoyant part.
That's so.
And as a person who was raised in the South but went to graduate school elsewhere, do you feel like there's regional influences on you? Are you a Southern kind of man, or is that not pertinent today?
Well, I've traveled to over 60 countries, and I've spoken probably in at least 50 countries. And my wife and I have been around the world probably 3-4 times. And we have personal friends all over the world. So I grew up in the South, but the world has had a big influence on me. It has changed me and educated me in a way that really nothing else, not school, not college, not medical school, nothing educated me the way being in the world has.
What are some examples of ways that you're different because you've traveled the world?
Well, I've slept in temples in Indonesia. I have met people and loved people in India. I've eaten food in the desert in Dubai. It really makes you see the world more as a home than as just a planet, as a theoretical discussion. It also makes me see people. When I turn on the TV or look at a movie, I can say, well, I've been there. I know people there. It makes the world feel more homey. And when you grow up in North Carolina, especially in southern North Carolina, it's a very provincial place. Most people never travel more than 100 miles from their home. So when you say you're going to the Middle East, they think you're in the military. Or people that are from north of the Mason-Dixon line, they're still Yankees. We don't sell Yankees gas here. That sort of thing. That's what my father used to say. So it really makes you see the world as a much bigger place that is your home rather than your territory.
When you were traveling, were you giving talks as well as being a tourist?
Mostly for just being a tourist.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking, I was in Tahrir Square during the revolution in 2011, and in Lhasa in Tibet when the Chinese were doing their thing. So I understand what you're saying about how expansive it is and how you experience things, new smells and tastes.
You were lucky to get out of there alive. What were you doing in Lhasa at that time?
I went to a women's conference in Beijing, and they had an add-on tour. And, I never felt unsafe, except for the people were toking on oxygen pillows because of the oxygen deprivation. But it was safe, but not for Tibetans, especially those if you mentioned Dalai Lama or had his picture or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you know your Myers-Briggs or your Enneagram type?
I have never studied that. It's not something I've ever worked with.
I think you'd be fascinated. Tell me about your family that you grew up in. What did they do to encourage you to go to med school and be such a high achiever?
I am the first person in my family to go to college. Most people in my family didn't finish high school.
Wow.
My father went as far as the 6th grade. My mother actually finished high school, but she had no schooling after that. My grandparents My grandfather went to the 3rd grade. My grandmother did not go to school.
She was illiterate?
So, no, yeah, well, she could read some, but there was no education in her family at all. Everybody was expected to contribute to the farm. We had a huge farm that I grew up on. And when I said that I wanted to go to college, they said, how are you going to pay for that? That was the first question. How are you going to pay for that?
Right.
So I knew that I had to get a scholarship, and I was going to have to support myself through that. They were not what I would call supportive.
So what did you have? Usually what the studies show is that kids have like at least one mentor who believes in them, like a teacher or a minister. So did you have someone like that?
There were fortunately several mentors that I had to recognize that I had this drive and I had good grades, and I did a lot of IQ tests, and they showed that I had a pretty good IQ. So there were a lot of people that were very supportive.
Were they
Miss
teachers?
Hamilton, my psych, they were teachers. One of my pastors was very supportive. So I really was very fortunate to be surrounded by people that they knew the family that I came from, and they supported my dreams, basically.
How many?
One teacher
Go ahead.
One teacher talked me out of actually going into, because I wanted to go into the Air Force. I didn't initially want to go to college, and she talked me out of going into the Air Force. God bless her.
How many siblings do you have?
I had 3 sisters and 2 brothers.
What was your birth order?
I'm in the middle. I had 2 older sisters. Actually, no. 3 sisters and 3 brothers. I had an older brother who passed when he was young, so I was smack dab in the middle.
I'm trying to understand why you... Did any of your other siblings go to college?
Actually, after I went, I had 2 sisters that went and a brother that went. So I kind of broke the mold and opened the doorway for them. And I had my 2 sisters quit, but my brother did finish.
Okay, I'm trying to understand why you had the drive that was fairly unique in your family. So, what do you...
Well, when you look at astrology, astrology only partially defines, I think, a person's interior or their soul. Yeah, when you look at my chart, it doesn't really tell you why I am who I am and where I get this drive from. I think it comes from somewhere else, because when you look at my family, I shouldn't be sitting here.
What about past life influences?
Past life influences would explain more, a lot more,
Do you have a feeling about what 1 or 2 of those past lives might have been?
I actually, when I looked at my birth chart in astrology and I found that it just wasn't explaining me well enough, I did an extensive search on past lives. And I came up with an interesting lineage that I think better defines me than astrology. And the lineage is connected to the god Thoth, a man by the name of Imhotep, a man by the name of Savali, who was a follower of the Buddha. That lineage of beings, and when you look at pictures of them, I look exactly like them.
So, like...
I look like Savali. I look like Imhotep. I mean, it looks like the same person.
So these are Egyptians. Thoth and Imhotep are Egyptians?
Thoth has an Egyptian lineage, though he is a god that is recognized in a number of pantheons. Imhotep is Greek and Egyptian. Savali is actually Thai and Buddhist.
So are you saying that you incarnated as those people, or that they influenced you in previous incarnations?
I'm saying that I incarnated as those people.
And
one of the first past life memories I had was working with the Buddha and providing food for him when he was going through the forest. And I later found out that that's what Savali did. That he was one of the people, well, the main person that provided food for the Buddha. I remembered that before I ever learned that. And I knew that years before I ever found out who Savali was.
That's impressive, being able to help the Buddha. And did you, in that lifetime, die a peaceful death?
Yes.
Okay.
Though the Buddha did not. He was poisoned, I believe. But fortunately, I was able to pass peacefully.
Why do you think your spirit picked being born into a poor Southern family?
You know, I ask myself that question quite a lot. And I think in part because there's a very strong suicide depression gene that runs in that whole area. And for me to become a psychiatrist to help with that, I think it gave people sort of at least a nugget of hope that they could get out of that crushing poverty, the crushing depression, to not always have to be forced to be an itinerant farmer. They saw that somebody could escape that. And just even a nugget of hope, I think, is worth a lot. And I think that's why the gods put me there, to show that this can be beaten, this condition that your family keeps incarnating in for hundreds and hundreds of years.
And maybe also because you had positions of high regard and respect, maybe your spirit wanted to experience humility and not being automatically regarded as somebody exalted. So it was humbling.
That would certainly fit. You don't get exalted growing up like that. I mean, in my house, we didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity for years.
So
I didn't take a shower until I went to college.
So you had an outhouse and sponge baths with basins?
That's right. That's right. I helped build our 3 outhouses.
Mm.
One of them fell over during a rainstorm.
Uh-oh.
And that's a mess to clean up an outhouse. So that's how I grew up.
That's definitely humility. That's humbling. Yeah. I think
Very humble.
I think that's part of what your spirit wanted. So where were you an undergraduate?
I went to undergraduate at Florida A&M University. That's in Tallahassee, Florida. I did medical school at North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I did residency at Albert Einstein Medical Center in Philadelphia.
And you finished medical training at 25? How in the heck did you do that?
I was actually 24, but I got my degree after my birthday. I finished college in 3 years, and I had worked at Procter & Gamble for a while, and then I went to medical school on a governor's scholarship, and that allowed me to focus just on medicine. I made myself not date. I made myself focus on just studying. Because in my mind, I always had that sense of crushing poverty almost shadowing me. And I said I did not want any part of that. When I looked at people who I went to high school with, most people didn't finish, and a lot of them worked for factories that no longer exist. And so most of the people I grew up with are living on $400 or $500 a month.
Wow.
Even now.
And then you decided to specialize in psychiatry because, you said, the depression and anxiety in the area that you grew up in.
My mother wanted me to be when she accepted the fact that I wanted to be a doctor, she wanted me to be a neurological surgeon. She wanted me to be a neurosurgeon. And that was the first rotation I took, and I absolutely hated it. Not just disliked, hated it. Big capital H.
You didn't like cutting into people's skulls?
Well, as a medical student, you don't really get to do that very much. But what I really hated was the hours and the ridiculously long call and the just outrageous time you had to get up every day to go to work. I mean, I had to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. Mm. I don't like 5 o'clock in the morning for that reason to this day. And you also had to, a 15-hour day was a normal day. And I thought that was a bit long. Even the people who were the doctors who had been working for 20 years started at 5 o'clock in the morning and didn't finish until 7, 8, 9 at night. I thought that was ridiculous. But you were the big neurosurgeons on campus, and you had the white coats, and you could say that you worked on people's brains. And I thought, no, screw that. I'm not doing that for a living.
What's interesting to me about psychiatry is, with Freud and Jung, and they did talk therapy. They tried to figure out the origins of people's oral, anal, genital stages or whatever, and how that affected them and their unconscious and their dreams and but then it seems like now psychiatrists are mostly, you got this, take this pill. Oh, you got this symptom, take this pill.
Well, that's an artifact of the times. Psychiatrists have to make a living. And insurance companies just refuse to pay a psychiatrist for therapy. You just can't get paid for even Medicare. If you're going to do therapy with people, you'd be lucky to get $25 for the hour.
What?
If you got two secretaries, that $25 is gone.
You got one secretary that's gone with Benny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is there a rationale for it? Because psychiatry is about helping people work through their issues, not just mask the symptoms.
Well, psychiatry is a derivative of psychoanalysis, in specific psychoanalytic psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And now, if you try to follow the psychoanalytic model, it used to be standard that in my training, we were trained to see people 3 times a week for at least a year, just even start psychotherapy. Well, now insurance companies won't pay you at all for psychotherapy hardly. And so you're forced to see people less often, and you're forced to treat them rapidly just to make a living. Now it's really about how much money you can make and if you can make a living.
So you have to be a pill pusher.
You really do.
You
really do. Otherwise, you just can't keep your doors open.
Right.
And it's the reason that finding a psychiatrist in private practice is very hard now.
Or only if you're very wealthy and you can afford to pay someone, your own. Have you explored the energy psychologies, the tapping on acupressure points, those kind of?
I've studied EFT, I've studied EMDR, I've studied some of those, yes.
And what do you think about their efficacy?
EMDR is fantastically efficacious. It is one of the things that changed when I was practicing medicine. It changed my practice. I saw people recover from things that normally would take weeks to months of therapy. I saw them recover in minutes. And once you get the art of it down, it really does transform how you see disease and trauma.
Did you use like brain hemisphere sounds, or did you use your finger back and forth, or what did you use in EMDR?
I had the electronic tapping device. I had a visual scanning device. It's like a long light bar that they could watch. But I found what was most effective was using my fingers. Using my fingers just like that. And going back and forth in front of their eyes. That works. It's almost like a form of pre-hypnosis.
Yeah.
It works fantastically well.
So, Francine Shapiro, who developed EMDR, I think she said that the reason it works is because it integrates left-right brain and allows for release of trauma. Is that your understanding of how it works?
I would agree with that understanding. Though I would also say that traumas tend to clump together in the brain, not unlike a cluster of grapes. And if you can identify at least one of the clumps in the trauma cluster and get it to discharge, the other ones discharge much more easily. I've seen that in dozens and dozens and dozens of people. So there is a cluster phenomenon that is associated with that isn't hemispheric, I think.
Gary Craig talks about it. You don't have to take down all the legs of a table to make it collapse. You just have to take enough that it goes. A
good example of that I treated a young lady who had fallen off of a boat, and she had a skull fracture and concussion after a result of that. And after that, she had difficulty sleeping and difficulty even leaving the house. In one session, all those traumas disappeared after we got to the kernel of what had happened.
Was it simply the trauma of falling off, or was there more to it?
It was. For her, it was more of trust. She felt like the people that were there should have watched after her as she was drinking more carefully. Specifically the people that she thought were close to her, should have been close to her. But once we got to that trust nugget, the whole cascade of that trauma dissolved. She started sleeping. She could eat better. I mean, it's like a light went on in her head. Her brain could work again.
Got it. You got into working with sleep disorders. What interested you about that?
I was always interested in sleep disorders. I did some sleep disorders training in my residency at Jefferson Medical Center in Philadelphia. And I worked with some pretty sophisticated sleep disorder specialists. And I saw that during sleep, it is not a restful phenomenon if you look at it scientifically. It is probably as complex, even sometimes in more ways, more complex a state of being than when you're awake. And I was fascinated by how complex sleep is. There's nothing that we do when we're awake that compares to all the things that go on during sleep. To me, that's just fascinating.
It is fascinating. Are you a dream recaller? Are you keen on dreams as a dream, as sleep and psychoanalyst person?
Yeah, I was trained in sleep disorders and sleep psychoanalysis, so I had quite a bit of training and experience in interpreting dreams. That's a big part of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy.
Do you keep a dream journal?
I did for about 10 years. And I also had a machine created by Stephen LeBurge that allowed me to become lucid in dreams more easily. And with that, I was able to record about 2 years worth of lucid dreams, in addition to just normal waking dreams.
What did the machine do? Did it wake you up a little bit?
It was actually an eye goggle machine that you put over your eyes before you went to sleep, and it sensed by the sensors that were in the over the eyelids when your mind went into rapid eye movement, and then it would flash a predetermined series of laser sensations in your eyes that would wake you up enough to awaken you in the dream, but not enough to awaken you physically.
What's an example of a lucid dream that you had? Or my experience with dream journals is there's patterns that the unconscious is working on, and it's the same theme kind of repeats until it resolves. Have you had something like that you worked on personally in your dreams?
I spent a lot of time in my lucid dream state in my hometown where I grew up, and I spent a lot of time with people that I grew up with. And it seems that there was a lot of unfinished business with them. And I stopped that cluster of memories and I moved on to medical school. And there was one particular incident in medical school that I worked on for 2 years in my dreams. And it involved me being in intensive care, working on some clients. And I would always show up late to rounds before I could find out what was going on with the clients. I had to work through that for 2 years. And after I got through those two things, I started spending a lot of time with angels.
Wow.
Mostly flying with them. It was like I had to deal with those experiences of humanity before I could deal with anything that I thought was different than humanity.
And did the angels...
And after I... Go ahead.
Did the angels take you to different realms, or were you just
I spent a lot of time in school with the angels. And they were teaching me things that I had never seen before. They taught me words, they taught me art, they taught me science. And it was interesting, we usually met in something that looked like a stadium in the sky. And the angels would fly and swarm around the stadium. And then when you sat down and you see your wings would go into your body, and you could not tell them from normal humans. They like to dress up like normal humans. They like to dress up like hippies. From what because they had the long hair and jeans and T-shirts and jackets. And you couldn't tell that you were to the USC football game by the time you sat down with them. So I spent years with them just learning stuff.
What's an example of something you learned that you would never have known on your own?
I did a book called Regnus Sancti Dracorum, which is a book about 4 what we call royal dragons. Royal dragons are dragons that originate in other dimensions of reality, and they are part dragon, part angel.
Wow.
And they rule over entire domains. I'd never heard of royal dragons, but I wrote a book on 4 royal dragons.
And they're benevolent?
And spells to help someone. Say again?
Are they benevolent?
Yes, they're benevolent.
So what's the dragon part? I mean, what does that make them very, like, powerful?
Well, Hollywood doesn't really give a good depiction of what a real dragon is like. A real dragon is a huge being. We're talking on an average of 50, 60 feet tall. The dragon in Game of Thrones is probably closer to a real dragon than most dragons you see in movies. They're also telepathic. They can speak better than we can in over 100 languages. They're also extremely psychic and telepathic in their ability to manipulate reality. They can make you see what they want you to see. So a dragon could be flying above you, but they can make themselves look like an airplane so that you won't know that that's a dragon. They also, I didn't know this, they can turn into people. A cross between a dragon and a human is called a drake. I'd never heard of that, but since I've learned that drakes exist. And so they taught me a lot about the life of dragons and how interwoven they are in human society, and we don't even know, we don't even recognize them.
So these exist on another dimension, not like on another solar system or planetary system or that kind of thing. They're other dimensional.
They have an interdimensional reality, which means that they exist partly in the physical world, partly in the astral world, and partly in the extra-dimensional world, which is beyond our reality. They have the capacity to exist in all of those states at one time. Humans can, but it's difficult for us. We don't like to focus on more than a couple of states at a time, that being sleep and dreams. But they have the ability to extend their reality and consciousness way beyond that.
The world is really in dire straits with the destruction of the environment and the big increase in the number of Trump-like autocrats around the world, Brazil, Philippines, Russia. Do they intervene in any way to help us, or do they strictly neutral?
I had the same questions that you have about why the world is the way it is. They have, in many cases, the higher beings I've intervened with and talked with, they have a strict coda among themselves. They don't like to intervene in problems that humans create for themselves. If, for instance, nature got out of hand or there were famines that were worldwide that weren't our fault caused by disease, they would help. But if we're killing ourselves and denying food to our neighbors for political reasons or things that we can control that we cause, they tend to stand back. Because they say we have to evolve enough to recognize that we're causing our own problems and take action when and where we can, which we tend not to do.
Well, people are saying maybe we have 12 years before the environment is totally made inhospitable to millions of people. Are you still in communication with them? And you say, could you help us out a little bit down here?
Well, we had the capacity with scientists such as Nikola Tesla and another scientist, Steinmetz out of Europe. We had the capacity to use free energy to make cars and have power in homes and power entire cities with no pollution. We didn't choose that. We allowed a handful of people to choose fossil fuels, which is interfering with the environment and causing global warming. Well, that's something that we did. We could have prevented that, but we did not. We did not rebel against those things that were clearly destroying our environment. So your concerns about what's going to happen in the world in the next 10, 15, 20 years, those are legitimate. They have confirmed to me that those things, unfortunately because of our choices, are going to be allowed to happen, which includes flooding, some famines, and some global diseases.
And then is the hope that we recover from it, or are we just doomed as a species?
Well, the thing that bothers them the most is that so many people theorize about problems in the world, but too many people stand back and let a handful of very bad people have their way with the planet. It's not enough to theorize and complain in the way that if you really want to change things, you have to get out there and get your hands dirty. And not enough people are willing to do that. So the people who are wealthy and powerful, they can do what they want. And they do what they want.
So if you were going to get your hands dirty, what would you do?
I would probably do it covertly, and I'd probably use magic.
Well, I think we need you to do it. You could disguise yourself as a bird and do something wonderful.
Yeah.
So are you still in touch with the angelic beings and the dragon angel beings?
Because of them, I've written over 50 books. And I've given probably over 100 seminars in many countries all over the world. And it has allowed me to totally stop practicing medicine. I stopped practicing in 2005. And it leaves me, when I work with them and in meditation with them, very close relationships on both sides of the veil.
So overall, are you hopeful or pessimistic about our future as a species?
Human race is a very difficult race.
Yep.
But it's also a very promising race.
Yep.
We allow hundreds of thousands of children to die every year of starvation and disease when we have the capacity to heal that. We allow more of the sex trade now than we did 100 years ago. 100 million people died in a world war that most people couldn't tell you what was the real reason for that. Yeah, Hitler was involved, but why did 100 million people have to die to stop one person, one country? We could have stopped that long before that. I'm hopeful, but I know human nature, both from my training and my own personal experience. Sometimes humans need to learn lessons.
Mm-hmm.
We really do.
Through consequences of our actions.
Well, I mean, you would think that if you could teach, you could get beyond consequences, but unfortunately, the human race learns best through consequences.
Like children.
Everybody knows somebody who's in an abusive relationship, and you say, "Oh, why don't you leave?" And then they give you the long story. I love the kids. I love, et cetera, et cetera. That's unfortunately all too common in humanity. We make excuses for bad things, and then we believe them.
In your book, Signs of Mental Illness, you talked about astrological and psychiatric breakthroughs. What's an example of a breakthrough in that you discuss?
Well, when I was working in psychiatry, I noticed that during certain times of the year, I would have more suicide attempts than what should be normal. I noticed that sometimes people would come in with anxiety disorders in waves. And I also noticed that there were just different cycles of things that didn't really make any sense. And yes, there was a full moon cycle, but I saw so many waves that just made me wonder, is there a reason for these waves of anxious people, for these waves of manic depressive? So I started taking birth data from people, and I started looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of charts and comparing diagnoses and planetary positions using a computer. And I found that there were patterns in birth data, according to diagnoses, that depressed people tend to have certain things that I could look for. The schizophrenics had things I could look for. And that when I plotted them against movements of stars in the sky, planets in the sky, I could tell when I was going to get a wave of anxious people. I could predict when I was going to get a wave of suicides. I could predict when I was going to get a wave of schizophrenics. And I also could look at a person's birth chart and tell what diseases or what mental illnesses they would be susceptible to just by the time they were born.
Does it have to do with squares and oppositions in their charts, and then that's triggered by constellations that shine on that square or that opposition?
When you look at squares and oppositions, those are two-dimensional movements in the sky. So if you look at the sky as a plate, the squares and oppositions all move around in a circular patterns on that plate. Well, the sky is actually three-dimensional. And so when you look at the two-dimensional squares and oppositions and then the extra-dimensional plane of declinations and conjunctions and different things, you recognize that there's a three-dimensional synergy with planets and stars and constellations that affects every one of us. And when you put those in a computer program, it very beautifully shows waves of energy connected to waves of conditions.
So if we were smart, we would look at a baby's birth chart and say, oh, we really need to work in this area to resolve this weakness or whatever. Have you done that with your children?
One of the greatest civilizations that is very adept at that are the Tibetans. They can look at a person's birth chart and tell you those same things. They use a different system than I do, but it's the same theory, that the sky is a living three-dimensional entity, and that you can tell a lot about a person's not only personality, but psyche through looking at the stars in the sky in the correct way. So yeah, I looked at my kids, I looked at my wife, I looked at people I was dating, I looked at my when a client came in that was difficult, I often got insight on how to treat them through looking at their birth chart.
Have any other psychoanalysts got, oh, I should use this tool, or do they just say, oh, I dismiss astrology?
Well, actually, Carl Jung was a brilliant astrologer.
Ah.
He often used astrological charts to help give him insight into his clients. Yes, and there are a number of other colleagues and people out there that use the birth chart.
Oh, good. In the course of your medical training, or I don't know if it was then or when you were in your own practice, you started getting clairvoyant insights into your patients. How did that come about?
I was introduced to the Kabbalah in Los Angeles in the year 1998, and I learned a prayer called the Anabakor. And that prayer, I knew a lot of prayers from growing up because I grew up in the church, but that prayer, the first time I said it, I felt a tingle like electricity go through my entire nervous system. It's like somebody hit me with lightning. And so I memorized it, and over the 2 or 3 years that I first started using it, it's like it turned on my etheric neural system. Mm. It was as though there was Mitchell before this prayer and then Mitchell after this prayer.
You also mentioned
and from that sort of turning on sensation that I got from that, I started developing more intense psychic and spiritual abilities, in particular clairvoyance. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, it was maybe a 2 before. It went up to an 8 or 9 after, just by learning and memorizing that prayer and then saying it on a regular basis. I since learned that the God Thoth wrote that prayer, and that it was his prayer that he used to help create the world.
No wonder that felt powerful.
It felt extraordinary.
You mentioned that you had initiations from Sri Mataji and Dira Devi. What did that come? That came before the Kabbalah prayer?
Yes, it came in 1994. I went to visit her in her ashram in Pune, India. And she placed inside of me some energy that felt like living water. That's all I could describe it. It was as though somebody opened up the top of my head and poured down a cross between water and electricity. And that, when I first experienced that, it made me vomit. It made me have diarrhea. It made my vision hyper alert. I started seeing glowing around everybody. And that lasted for 2 months before it settled down.
Is that the hugging, is that Amma, the hugging guru?
No, Ma, or Indira Devi, was the wife of the ambassador to England from India. Hmm. She was a very wealthy woman. She was a billionaire in India, and her husband was very wealthy, though her family didn't like the fact that she was studying spirituality. So she passed maybe 5-6 years ago. She's a very powerful, very advanced Indian saint and teacher.
What else did she teach besides giving darshan that initiated
She wrote over 40 books, most all of them in her own home language. And she talked about the goddess Lakshmi, the goddess, she called the goddess Ma, but I think it more than anything was probably the goddess Mot. And she also wrote about higher consciousness and life on other planets. Only one of her books has ever been translated into English. The vast majority of her works has never been translated.
So it was the combination of your past life experiences, the initiation, the prayer that kind of heightened your clairvoyant abilities.
Well, I think probably those things heightened me, but the biggest accelerator of my consciousness was learning to take in sunlight. Nothing compared to that.
How do you take in sunlight consciously?
Well, I had a teacher by the name of Jean Savoy who was a self-taught archaeologist, a real-life Indiana Jones. He spent a lot of time in South America, and he discovered in a couple of South American cultures this phenomenon where priests would use parabolic mirrors to take in sunlight and communicate with beings in the sun. He learned to take in sunlight, and it enlivened his nervous system. He wrote a book called Project X, in which he talked about his experiences with these mirrors and with these beings, and also with taking in sunlight different times of the day. Well, I was skeptical because I thought sunlight will blind you if you look at the sun the wrong way.
Yeah.
But I got parabolic mirrors. I followed his instructions. I met him. I worked with him. And I found that taking it in the right way, especially starting with sunrise sun, sunlight actually accelerates consciousness and accelerates the growth of your nervous system in a way that nothing else does. I attribute sunlight to the vast majority of what I consider my consciousness.
And did you take it in through your eyes or through your whole body?
You can take it in a number of ways. You can take it in just by sitting out. You see, all the light that is on this planet is sunlight. Light does come in through the stars, through some of the quasars and some of the larger nebula, but what we see as light, what we recognize as light, largely is sunlight. And so when you just sit outside, you're going to be taking in sunlight through your skin. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't have enough of it. But there's 19 separate vitamins that we get from taking in sunlight, vitamin D being the most famous. Melatonin is another hormone we need from sunlight. You can take it in through your skin. You can take it in through your eyes. You can take it in through your acupuncture points. There's a number of ways to take it in.
So you just would consciously say, okay, my heart meridian point number 5, I'm going to set the intention.
It's not quite as straightforward as that.
Okay.
When I take in sunlight, I have a solar box that I use. It has mirrors. It has crystals. My main tool that I use is a golden parabolic mirror like the Incans used. That's my main tool. And it changes the polarity of sunlight so that it actually doesn't hurt your eyes.
Wow.
And you do see the same beings in the sun that they saw and wrote about, and that Jean Savoy saw and wrote. What he taught me absolutely works. So
the being is like a expansive nature spirit, like sylphs or undines or something like that. It's like the fire spirit of the sun, or it's something totally different.
Totally different. When you look at the sun, there's an attunement process that goes on for a couple of years after you start, where you begin to see the sun pulsing and vibrating. It's like a big, gigantic heart. And after about 2 or 3 years, you see a dark spot in the middle of the sun. And you focus on that spot for a while, and then you start saying certain prayers, and then that spot opens in your consciousness, in your third eye, and you begin to see cities in the sun. Golden cities that are streets that are paved with something that looks like gold, but it's not gold. And you see things that look like heaven, but you also see cities that look like Incan and Mayan and Aztec temples. You see all of that in the sun. And there are beings, literally civilizations that still live there. The Incans and Mayans, I believe, fashioned their cities after these civilizations that they saw in the sun. And that's what they said. They said that they fashioned their cities after beings from the sun, gods that came out of the sky. I think they established a relationship with these higher beings and used that relationship to fashion their civilizations, which are quite advanced even compared to civilizations now.
Some people can use their clairvoyance just to help other people, but do you find that you also get guidance about your next step or the person you should marry or that kind of thing?
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Did you have a feeling that you were going to meet your wife before you met her?
You know, I met my wife online. We both had been online, meeting people and dating, but I was sick of it by the time I met her. And so I changed my profile, and I had two things. I had a picture of myself, and I had a poem by Khalil Gibran, and that's it. I didn't have any, age, nothing. I said, if anybody wants to really meet me and get to know me, they're going to recognize who I am through this poem. And she did. She said, I like a man that likes Gibran. And I said, that's my kind of woman.
What was the poem where he talks about...
I don't know. It was from one of his older books. I have probably 50 different writings and essays by Gibran. I can't remember which one. It was 20 years ago now, but it was a Gibran poem that I liked at the time.
And is she a scientist like you?
No, not at all. She's more of, she emotes more, and she's more of an empath, I would say. A very highly developed empath, which is a good balance for me.
And did your art inspiration also come from higher guidance?
When I go into meditation, when I go into the sun, I actually go to art galleries. And in the galleries, I see a lot of art, some of which I just don't have the skill to bring back. But they said you can bring back whatever you can remember. And that's where my art comes from.
Fabulous.
And I have sold literally thousands of pieces of art all over the world. And when you look at it, you can say, that's not so good.
Let's see. Let's just take a look at some of your other books. You said that you've written 50 books?
That's right. That's right. Probably more than that.
What do you think are the most, if you were going to tell people you should read these 2 books at least of my books to help you in your path as it progresses, which ones would you pick?
I write at different levels. I write books that are called accelerated texts, which are designed to help speed up consciousness and help people communicate with higher beings. And I write novels and just traditional books, just like a J.K. Rowling or anything. And then I write books called power books, which are books of spells and incantations meant for people who are more serious about their spiritual growth at a much higher level. If I were going to recommend just my regular novels and traditional books, I would say 9 Insights for a Highly Successful Life and First Darkness. Those 2 books I would recommend right off the bat. Okay.
As someone with medical training, I would assume that you're interested in the spiritual bodies, the kind of anatomy of spirit. Barbara Brennan, I think, does a good job of explaining the 7 layers of the auras and the chakras and the Hara line and the core star. How do you describe our energy bodies?
I have some pretty sophisticated aura equipment that actually enables you to see not only the aura, but the chakras and the petals and all that. And you can see them in 3D, in the living body. And there's more than 7 chakras. And you can also see that there are different inclusions in the body and in the aura that can help you understand disease at a whole different level. I have equipment that can measure acupuncture points and let you see the points. And we have equipment that allows you to examine the body energetically in ways that aren't really very well known at this point. So I used to use that equipment. I don't really use it as much as I used to, but I used to use that equipment to help me explore what works energetically and what doesn't. And that's where a lot of our recordings and some of my books came from. Looking at, for instance, spiritual protection is something that I'm really very much into. And at the time maybe starting 15 or so years ago, I found that most of the tools that are out there for spiritual protection don't do a good job. So a person would come in and they would say, look at my aura, check my medallion, my cross, whatever. And I would say, you see that face right there? You see that head right there? You see that little thing with horns right there? What do you think those are? And people would just be terrified when I would show them these entities that were still inside their aura despite their protective tool. And so over the years, I learned what worked and what didn't work to actually protect people, and that if you put on a protective device, you shouldn't be able to see those things in an aura. Those things should be removed. And that's how we started offering medallions and certain spiritual tools. That's where they came from.
So for people who don't want to wear something, what do you suggest to...
Well, the average human being, we found, has about 10 to 15 attaching spirits. We just do. And a lot of those spirits over time will tend to cause disease in the body. And prayers help, meditation helps, but it's difficult for us to hold concentration long enough to keep them out, especially, for instance, when we're sleeping. And that having some sort of protective tool is almost a necessity for the average human being. We just can't protect ourselves long enough to stop their onslaught. We're food to them.
Do you have...
They're serious about feeding on us.
Can you show us one of those kind of protective tools? Do you have one around?
I have a number of them around. If you wait a moment, I'll go get one for you.
Great.
Hold on.
You. Okay.
Hold on. Okay. Let me first, I think you'll be able to see this better. So just take a second. This is one of the tools that is a combination of, can you see that?
I can see about halfway down, so maybe up higher. Oh, it's a jacket.
It's a jacket, but it has the Annabelle Core, the Miracle Prayer, built into it.
Wow.
I turned the Miracle Prayer into a code, a binary code, and a person can wear this when they feel like they're going to have the need for extra protection. Now, that's a piece of clothing. But we also have something, our best protection is our medallions. And that's something that people can wear anytime. Let me just go to that page.
And if people wanted to get it, they can just go to your website and order it?
Yeah, the website is called tybro.com. tybro.com.
Tybor.
tybro.com.
Tybro.
That's right. This is, let me just show you this. This is our strongest protective tool, if you can see that.
It's like Hebrew letters, huh?
It's like Hebrew letters, but it's a very specific combination of letters. It is our strongest protective tool. It's about 2 inches across, and you can wear it under your clothing, but it's designed to prevent spirits from getting into your aura and it's one of the things we've tested. It works very well.
What do the letters mean?
It's called the Angels of Sanctification Medallion, and it represents. There is also a computer program underneath their letters in the. I can just show you. If you look at it very closely, you'll see something that looks like a circuit board under the letters.
Yes.
That's a program. That's an etheric computer program. Not very common on this world. When the letters represent each of the angels of sanctification, it connects their energy to the energy of the medallion, which then connects to the energy of your aura. And it penetrates the energy of your aura and allows your aura, the protective energy in your aura, to be amplified and protects you just by putting it on. And that was developed because of years of working with things that worked and some that didn't work. And we found out that it's important to connect with the energy of higher, more perfect beings in order to protect your aura here. Just thinking it and hoping it, but the human mind just doesn't work.
Who's we? Is that the royal? You said we. Is that the royal we, or you work with others?
Others, yes.
Okay.
Angels primarily. Angels and dragons primarily.
Do you think that those lower level astral entities are just like bacteria that want to feed on human energy, or do they want to do evil, or what is their intent in coming into our space?
There are entire classes of entities that look just like us, except that they're astral and not physical. They're not bacteria. They may use bacteria as a vector to infect a body, but they themselves are highly intelligent, in many cases highly evolved. And a lot of people make the mistake of underestimating their abilities.
And what's their intent?
Well, they're not human. And they're not beings that exist in the way that you and I would understand as people. But their intent is to further and extend their own lifespans at our expense.
So they're parasites.
Very much so.
Some people talk about reptilians as having a lot of control in human history. Is this kind of the same kind of...
Well, reptilians are kind of on a low order parasitic entity that affects the human race. There are races that are far more insidious than reptiles. The reptiles just get a lot of the press, but they're bit players.
Do you think that those negative entities are in any way connected with the Trumpian kind of forces?
I don't do politics.
Seems like a good foil for them.
I don't do politics.
Okay.
I know, for instance, that politicians, for the most part, are primarily puppets. They don't have the power that they profess to. Well, they're also bit players.
They're puppets to their donors, but you're saying they're also puppets to these other dimensional machinations?
Very much so. These beings think in terms of centuries. They don't mind having a plan take 50 years to unfold. A human lifespan to them is nothing. That would be like crushing on a gnat or an ant.
But if they get rid of us, then they wouldn't have their food to eat.
The plan is not to get rid of us. That's not the plan.
What's the plan?
You ever see a child play with insects?
Yeah.
And you ever notice at the end of the day, the child kind of loses interest in the insects over time?
Yeah.
And goes on to something else? Well, to these beings that are old and evolved and advanced, we're their playthings. That's all we are to them. Their goal is to play with us as long as we're interested. That's it.
It's like those little roly-poly bugs. Did you ever play with those when you were a kid?
I sure did.
So
there's no big plan to wipe us all out, because then where's the interest in that? Their goal is to play with us. to toy with us, to see what we can tolerate, what we can't tolerate, to see what will help us and what we want. We're just interested. And that's it.
And these are different than the Greys, the ETs that people say do operations and scientific experiments on abductees and stuff.
I believe that at any one time there's 50 or 60 different races playing with the human race.
Do you think that that's because there's not many human forms in the universe? I mean, because the universe is so vast, there must be other humanoid kind of forms they can play with too.
There are many races that they play with. Ours is just one.
Some people have hope that the Pleiadians will help us, or, you know, evolved ETs like that. Do you think that's a reality?
One of the difficulties we have is that we do so much to ourselves. It invites those insidious energies into our domain. So it's like going into a troubled neighborhood and trying to, for instance, put up a grocery store. One of the problems you're going to run into is that people they will shoplift and steal and rob the grocery store, so that eventually you have to close it. Even though you're trying to bring them food, they will make it so that you can't keep the store open. A simple analogy like that is very applicable to the human race. We make it difficult to help us. For instance, if a race bought very high technology, the first thing that would happen to it would turn into a bidding war, and to see if you could weaponize it or make a profit off of it. And it would never reach the masses because of that.
What's your next book? What are you currently interested in learning about? What's your next?
My next book is going to be called Dragon Summonings, and it's going to teach people how to summon the major groupings and orders of dragons, which I believe are real and that still live on this planet.
Well, it's encouraging that you see them as helpful to us, and
I do see some of them as helpful. Some of them aren't. Some of them you couldn't even begin to say are helpful, but yes, some of them are.
So we have to be careful who we summon.
That's right. That's right. That's why I'm writing this book on some. There are people on the left-handed path that'll teach you how to summon the dark ones. The dark ones will also grant you power. So I think there needs to be some balance in the writing about them. That's the main reason I'm writing.
Right. And do you like use your abilities to pray for the good of the planet, or try to, you know?
Well, I just mostly pray for popcorn and chocolate. Whenever I can, we try to help. I try to help with as much as I can.
A lot of people are talking about consciousness that I've interviewed, that consciousness is kind of the key thing that people are thinking about. I think is an alternative to spirituality. It's less loaded in a way.
I think consciousness is our best currency in the entire universe. Humans have not spent nearly enough time developing consciousness. As it is, one of the biggest currencies that we have is money. But we don't understand that in order to have any kind of a place in the universe, you need to develop consciousness.
And how do you define that?
Consciousness is the ability to make choices. The wider your consciousness, the more choices you can make. There are some choices that we don't understand because we don't have the consciousness to comprehend them.
Are your children evolved because you have all this knowledge that most people don't have? Have they been able to take advantage of it?
Both my children just finished college, and they work for me. They work for my wife and I. We have a film production company. We produce TV shows and films, and they are editors and photographers, and, there are people, there are staff. They also answer the phone. We have a staff of 5 people, and they run that. They, like any teenager and a young person, they rebelled. But after they were out in the world for a while, they started coming to, they didn't want to come to the seminars at first. But they kept seeing all these people coming to the seminars and asking us questions. And then they started making decisions in their lives, and they would say, Mom and Dad said that. Mom and Dad said that. And then they got curious. That curiosity hooked them. Now they want to know everything we know.
Oh, that's exciting. That's great.
Well, when you tell them enough about what's going to happen in a relationship before you even meet the guy, they start paying attention. They say, how'd you know that? How'd you know that? I said, I looked at his chart. I looked at his aura. Now they want to know how to do that.
All right. So when you see people, do you automatically see their auras, or do you have to kind of focus?
I don't do therapy or medicine anymore, but I do still have the ability to see auras. And over time, I've learned to turn it on and off. If I get really tired or sleepy, it's harder to turn it on and off. But if I'm well rested, it's very easy to control.
The other thing that's kind of a thematic is the discussion of quantum physics, that it explains a lot of the paranormal. Is that something that's useful for you in explaining why we can do prayer from a distance, or clairvoyance, or precognition, or any of that?
Very much so. Quantum entanglement, quantum resonance, the concept that the universe responds to us individually, that things don't exist until we focus on them, that's very much at the core of what I work with and how I teach.
And how do you define quantum resonance?
For quantum entanglement, it's a phenomena that is at the core of quantum physics, which says that once an item has contact with another item, they are forever entangled energetically. And that when two people share thoughts, that entangles them. When two people share words, that entangles them.
The interesting thing about non-locality to me is that if you separate entangled particles, they influence each other. Yeah. What do you think is the explanation for how they can connect at a distance instantaneously?
There is no distance. There is no time. There is no separation. I believe that we live in a tremendously sophisticated program. Not unlike a computer program, but far more sophisticated. And that all of our thoughts, all human consciousness, are part of the network of what I call participles or binary code that live within that program. Everything is connected to everything else through this immensely sophisticated program.
And do you think there's a intelligent force behind it that some people call God? What's behind the program? Who made the program?
I think God is something bigger than we can comprehend. And that this program is one of trillions of programs running simultaneously, all of which have nothing to do with God. God is bigger than we can comprehend, and God is bigger than these programs.
So you're saying that like there's an Earth program and a Mars program, or how are the levels of programs that you're thinking of?
If you went to a beach and you picked up one individual grain of sand, there are more molecules within that grain of sand than there are stars in the universe. But you're talking about one grain of sand. If you look at all the grains of sand on a beach as a totality, you've got more molecules than exist in the entire universe. But you're just looking at one beach, one grain of sand, one type of sand. You haven't taken into account the trees or the water or the bacteria in the sand. The programs are nothing more than single grains of sand, single grains of consciousness in a large sea of consciousness.
And is it evolving, becoming closer to the Creator, or is there some kind of direction, or is it
some are evolving, some are devolving, some are stagnant. They are all over the place. I believe that this one is a stagnant race, and in some ways devolving. There are a few levels of evolving consciousness, but the vast majority of consciousness here is angry, violent, and devolving.
On Earth.
Much more than we would like to even think about.
Right. I just read that 85,000 babies starved to death in Yemen in the last 3 years. So it's like there's no excuse for that.
One country.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you think would be useful to readers to know about that you've found important to you?
I think 3 things probably. Learn a Divine World Prayer. We have a number of those on our website. We give one away, the main one that we use, called the Miracle Prayer. It changes your connection and consciousness with the universe. Develop a relationship, sit in the sun and take in sunlight on a regular basis. And also get one spiritual tool that has power, like a medallion, like one of our spiritual crosses. Get something that has power. Use that while you're praying. Put it under your pillow when you sleep. It is transformative.
So
it's certainly been wonderful talking with you.
Thank you. Last question. Who else would you recommend that be in the book alongside of you? That's a visionary scientist.
I like Neil deGrasse Tyson. I can't think of a lot off the top of my head, but I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. We'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Okay. Bye.